The European Union and India are stepping onto a bigger stage, with the recent signing of a new free trade agreement marking a pivotal moment in their evolving relationship. Since 2016, the EU has increasingly positioned itself as a strategic actor with influence across security, defense, energy, and broader cooperation. How transformative could the EU India partnership become in industries like technology, trade, and energy? Could the partnership redefine rules of engagement for the EU? As we explore this evolving relationship, we'll also examine the ripple effects it's having and what this could mean for global influence in an increasingly complex world. I'm Brandy Miller, and this is A View from Brussels. Welcome back to View from Brussels, and today in the studio I'm delighted to have Stefania Benaglia, who is EU Foreign Policy Advisor, as well as one of Brussels' leading experts on EU-India relations. Stefania, as you know, in recent weeks, trade policy has jumped back to the top of the agenda. We've seen the EU-Mercosur deal face resistance in member states, as well as the EU-US freeze and unfreeze of the trade deal. And now with the EU-India free trade agreement, we've seen far less resistance. So why do you think this deal has started to become an easier sell and more palatable in the EU?
First of all, thank you for having me. I would say that because India is such a strategic partner, we need to invest, and there's no doubt about it. This is a lengthy process, of course, trade deals, especially of the complexity as the one that we have with India, is not something that happens overnight. Actually, it was quite fast because this last round started in 2021. So if
Okay.
you consider what is actually at stake and how much they managed to agree, it's a very fast negotiation. It is a negotiation that has been on and off since about 20 years, though. So they have been reflecting on the need of having this trade deal for a long time. The reason is that while India has always been a strategic partner of importance for the EU since 2004, the awareness and the recognition to step up the relation has been increasing since, let's say, about after COVID. We have seen an acceleration with a couple of, first it was symbolic rapprochement. There were a few years of lack of relationship and exchanges since the relationship restarted. And especially after the acceleration of COVID, we have seen an investment, particularly from the EU side, but in hand, of course, with India, because you need to have an agreement on both sides.
Gotcha.
So the acknowledgement and the realization that the EU needs a partner as India and vice versa. And this is why we have the deal that we have today. And the relatively lack of backlash is because of the realization of the importance of such a deal.
Yes, and in a recent post, you also wrote that the EU-India Free Trade Agreement did not emerge as a byproduct of the trade war, which could be perhaps a misconception for those who are not aware with the context of the deal, let alone the history. So you were speaking a bit of how it didn't start overnight, but it has been accelerated. Could you walk us through some of the recent milestones, particularly since COVID, that helped bring the two sides together?
I would say that there was during the Portuguese presidency in 2021, there was a leaders meeting. The difference between the summit and the leaders meeting is that during the summit usually is von der Leyen and the president of the council, of course the president of the commission and the president of the council meeting with the prime minister. In that case, it was the whole 27. This gave access to all the countries, the member states, to meet with Modi, which is not something that should be taken as granted because not everybody has the same level of access. And that was a huge symbolic gesture that was well received also on the Indian side. And then that kind of like kicked off the relationship with a new rhythm. Every year moving forward, there has been another milestone, which is the Trade and Technology Council that was established in 2022, where the relationship started moving on the whole trade and technology, which is a huge area of cooperation and partnership, hugely important not only for today, but especially for tomorrow. And then I would say that another milestone, more on the symbolism, but that really signals the importance. Of course, in diplomacy, it is very important. The signaling is very important. Was the college visit in February 25. So the whole College of Commissioners went to India for a visit, which is as much as for the Leaders Summit, Leaders Meeting, it was a first. The college doesn't travel. As you can well imagine, it is also a huge undertaking. And it did travel to India. And that was very well received. And that moved further the relationship forward, signaling the importance that the EU gives to India. So that was really, way to push the relationship forward.
Yeah, to help move the needle over the
Yes.
past years. So you touched upon trade and technology as well. And I do want to slightly dive into a bit of this on the practical aspects. So, how transformative do you see the EU India partnership playing out in practical terms on technology and trade?
Hugely, especially when it comes to trade, to technology. Trade as well, but let me focus on technology because the India has been, still is, and will be tomorrow, a place where you do have the capacity of invent and bring forward and scale up. So from startup to scale, something that the EU, of course, needs to learn as well. It's a place where these things happen at a depth and at a speed that is hugely transformational. So be a partner with India on this trend. Let's also bring into the discussion the whole technology dependence, which is something that, of course, nobody wants to have technology weaponized, but not taking into consideration that in the unlikely scenario that it might be in the future, you better be prepared. You better be prepared, and acting as if that was, ruling out that possibility is simply not strategically advised. Developing your own technology, developing that technology that allow you not to have critical dependencies on any other, it is vital. And this is something that India is undertaking, and that with the EU, there is a huge potential in walking the path of the strategic autonomy in the sense of technology. So what I mean, the main key message here is not to be critically dependent on technology that can be, in the unlikely and unfortunate scenario, weaponized. So that is where this strategic partnership can really be a game changer for both.
That's great. And so you spoke a bit about weaponization as well from the technology side, but on the topic of defense and the rapid rise of the need for EU to have its more defensive posture, how does defense cooperation fit into the broader EU India partnership?
Again, can be a game changer. So a little step back. India is the largest importer of defense in the world since a while. It has a huge dependency on Russia defense cooperation historically, which has been historically, Europeans, especially France, has been trying to balance that one out. So this is a little bit the macro framework. There is an investment from the EU into India to help it diversify away from Russia. Of course, we know that is also strategically important for us.
Yeah, for the EU.
Now, what about India for the EU? That is the interesting question, because the EU needs to reach mass and capacity, and India is something that can really help the EU to reach these objectives. So while on the more technological compartment, it is more interesting a conversation where the EU contributes to India diversification, India can certainly contribute to the European effort on reaching mass at a low cost. And that is where you do have a partnership which is not wage on one side, but is really balanced on a 50-50, which is where we want to go. We want to have a strategic partnership where both partners contribute in complementary terms to each other in a very substantial way.
So, of course, we know the relationship between the EU and India does not exist in a vacuum. Even as the EU and India partnership deepens, ties with the United States remains critical for both, especially when it comes to technology and strategic dependencies. Do you see Washington influencing the way this relationship develops?
I would take another angle here. I would say that the EU in this context need to think about what credible offer is capable of presenting. In this context, and they take as an example the recent FTA that the EU signed with India, but they also take the trade deal that India signed with the US. The big difference there is that the EU did an FTA, which is legally binding. It takes years of negotiation. It's a complex messaging, which, it's a complex endeavor where a lot of impact in it, and with the aim of being transformational for the whole trade sector. The US did a deal, which was done pretty much overnight at the highest level. Deals are not the same things as FTA. They're not the same legally binding. They do not have the same structure. This goes with the credibility of the offer that the EU does. The EU might take a little bit longer to reach an agreement and a decision, but once it takes it, it is a reliable decision. You can expect the outcome that you have agreed on. And this is going to be a community, huge commodity for the international relations, where you have predictability. You know what you will get, and you have certainties, which is extremely important in foreign policy, because that is how businesses run as well. So will the US influence? Of course, the US have been a huge variable for the history in the last decades, and they will remain a huge partner for both the EU and India. But there is a difference awareness now, which is, as it is for the technology excessive dependency, it is as well as a capacity of standing on your own ground, in your own terms, providing a compelling offer from the EU. And that is what is changing from the EU side, understanding what can be the compelling offer that the EU can offer, and have a bilateral relation that stands in its own merit with India, which has been, again, it's also the merit of 20 years of build-up, and the bilateral relation is not something that happens overnight.
So you do mention that the FTA between the EU and India as being more credible and legally binding versus the deals mentioned with the US, if I'm not mistaken. So
sorry, it's just a slightly different. So a deal is a deal that can change in the future. An FTA can also change, because everything can change, but it's much more binding.
It is based on the law of it, or the legality of it, correct? So, and that's very interesting context. But also, as we know, that turning law into action, as well as making good on these political commitments, can be difficult. So how do you see this becoming more tangible once the FTA comes into force?
The game changer will be business and people to people, because the FTA is a framework, a very good and important framework. At the end of the day, it will be implemented by business. And at the end of the day, it will be the trust that needs to be built between businesses that make it work. The people to people that will bridge a little bit, and I might actually flag that there is still a little bit of trust gap between the EU and India, mostly also linked with the level of awareness that in reciprocal terms you have. There's not a lot of exposure on India in the EU, and vice versa. The level of awareness and understanding of what these two actors are is still suboptimal. People to people, possibility of attracting all the talents that India can provide for the European market, and vice versa. Also, the Europeans' business that can go in India and do business in India itself. This will certainly accelerate the implementation of this excellent framework.
That's great. And so, with such hope and prosperity that should hopefully come out of this deal, do you see the India EU relationship serving as a possible template for future deals, particularly with regards to China or across the global south?
You mean if the EU-India FTA can be an FTA that is duplicated elsewhere?
Yes.
I would take more of the strategic approach, rather than the duplication of the FTAs. I do not dare to comment there.
No problem.
Especially also because I don't know how the negotiators will. I'm sure that they had a tough few months, especially running towards the closure of it. Should the EU be strategic with its partnership? Yes, that is the point that I want to take out of it. And what do I mean here? The partnership with India does not see eye to eye on everything. Obviously, this is hard also between the 27 member states, let alone with someone else. What is the reaching of the maturity that we are reaching with India is that you can acknowledge that you have differences. And here I'm talking particularly at relations with Russia. That's what I am referring at. With relations with Russia, there is this awareness that is increasing that you need to acknowledge that there are differences, but you need to have a dialogue that go further, and you need to understand and to learn how to work despite the differences. Acknowledging doesn't mean agreeing, of course, but still finding a way to work things forward. And this is the approach that the EU can learn from its relations with India, learning how to still have a constructive relationship with its partners, even when you do have structural differences.
Yeah. So would that be your key message that you want to take away from moving forward as the EU pursues more trade relationships and diversifies away, particularly from the US?
Just a point, it's not necessarily a diversification from the US in itself. It
Yeah.
is not against anybody, it is for the
It is
EU.
for the EU.
It is the EU that is growing as an actor. And when you grow as an actor, you do have more independence. That's what the EU is doing. So it's not necessarily something against the US or against anything else, anybody else.
Yeah,
It's
as we
more
said
of,
at the top of the episode, it's not in or because of the
no,
EU-US relationship right now that this is happening.
it is really the time for the EU to become a global actor, perhaps even a global security actor,
Mm.
certainly in regional terms. Let's be seen if it is a global one. If it is a global one, we need to start thinking about reciprocity. So not only what we want from our partners, but what are we ready to give them? What are we ready to contribute to them? Which is obviously going to be, a strong reflection to have. But yes, the EU is growing as a global partner. It is becoming geoeconomic, but also geostrategic. And with this, it needs to learn how to be more strategic in its decisions.
Great. And what are you looking forward to, I'd say, as the last question in the next phases in the immediate term of the EU-India partnership?
The Trade and Technology Council. That will be, there is an expected reflection point on the Trade and Technology Council, because perhaps it did not deliver as much as it could. I wish there will be a reflection on concrete terms how we can actually fulfill the whole potential of the Trade and Technology Council, because there's much there, talking about the developing the future technologies, developing an infrastructure that will allow both the EU and India to be less technological dependent from others. A discussion about, what about the security angle there, which is currently not into part of the conversation. The climate angle, the green transition, which is a huge part of the conversation also, because of course the direction where India will go will impact us all. So all of these discussions, which are fundamental and strategic, I expect there to have some room and some improvement, so ways to move things forward in the next Trade and Technology Council meeting. Well, set up.
Yeah, setup. Great. Well, we look forward to as well monitoring that and hopefully having a follow-up discussion, maybe a little bit more technical. But thank you so much for giving our audience insights into what has been happening in the EU-India trade agreement. And it was a pleasure to have you. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in.